Hey, what's going on, guys? What's happening? YouTube, you guys have tuned into Rules for Rebels. In today's video, we're going to be talking about remote work. Remote work has been a hot topic over the last year and a half with the COVID pandemic causing lockdowns and causing a lot of companies to switch to remote work and to allow remote workers and allow people to work from home. It's kind of really forced a lot of companies to kind of participate in this whole remote work experiment, right? For a number of years, a lot of people have been pushing the idea of remote work. Look, the technology is here. The idea that we all have to go into an office and sit in some specific chair for 8 hours a day is kind of an antiquated idea that we no longer necessarily need to follow. Obviously, there are companies who want employees back in the offices. There's some people out there who enjoy being in offices and don't really enjoy working from home. As always, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Did you go remote during the pandemic? If so, what did you think of it? Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy not having to do dry cleaning or not having to have clothes ready for work? Did you enjoy not having to pack lunches? Did you enjoy not having to commute? Or, did you not like it? There's definitely some people out there who actually like their coworkers. There's definitely some people out there who don't like working from home, who get lonely, who get bored, and people who actually kind of like that routine of going to work, stopping at the gym on their way home, grabbing lunch. A lot of people work in kind of a downtown trendy area with a lot of shops and bars and restaurants, and a lot of people kind of like that aspect of their routine. Now, throughout the lockdowns, we heard a lot of companies say, I think Twitter said, we're going to make the option to work remotely a permanent thing. People who like this, people who want to work remotely, they can do so. And then we've seen some other companies who kind of reluctantly let people start working remotely. I know there were a couple Wall Street banks, and I think a couple social media companies, maybe Facebook, who said, look, you can work remotely, but there's a reason we pay these high salaries. Like, if you're not living in San Francisco, we're not going to pay you a San Francisco wage. And I think it brings up an interesting point, which is the value you bring to an organization, is the work you do based on the work you do, or should it be dependent on location? Now, the idea that higher cost of living cities are going to pay higher wages isn't necessarily a crazy one, right? Like, somebody who works at even as a cashier at a Walmart store in San Diego or New York City is going to make more than somebody who works an equivalent job as a cashier at Walmart in Des Moines, Iowa, right? Like, jobs to some extent have to kind of cater to the cost of living of a certain area. But with kind of more white collar jobs where you're bringing something very clear to the table, and maybe you start off working in San Francisco and you wind up leaving to go live in a smaller city or a lower cost of living city, should your wages drop? I actually saw a study that came out recently that I think said on average people were willing to take a 5% pay cut if it meant that they were able to continue working from home. And I forget the stat, but I saw a stat a while back in an article. I think it was something to the effect of, assuming you have the average commute, which is something like 30 to 42 minutes. If you have the average commute, when you factor in wear and tear on your car, the cost of gas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I think it wound up being something like $1,800 a year that the average person winds up paying to commute. Now, obviously, the more you make, the less this is a percentage of your wages, but nobody really likes commuting. There's also been a number of studies that have come out recently that have shown that the longer your commute, the more unhappy you are, the more likely you are to suffer from depression, and just overall, the less happy you are to be with your life. So just something to keep in mind when you guys are looking for future jobs. If you are looking for future jobs, a lot of times we think, a 45-minute commute, an hour commute, that wouldn't be that bad. According to studies and surveys and people who do it, it definitely does contribute to your level of happiness or lack thereof. But as always, want to hear what you guys think. Should somebody take a pay cut if they work remotely? And or should somebody take a pay cut if they move from a high cost of living city to a low cost of living city? So let's hop right on into this one. And again, this one comes to us from Reuters. And it's titled, "The Great Reboot, Pay Cut, Google Employees Who Work From Home Could Lose Money." And what's kind of interesting about this, again, during the pandemic, a lot of companies, this has been a great social experiment. We've seen upticks in productivity. We're going to let people do this forever. But what we didn't hear was we're also going to cut your pay for doing this. So hopping into the article, New York, August 10th, Reuters. Google employees based in the same office before the pandemic could see different changes in pay if they switch to working from home permanently, with long commuters hit hard, according to a company pay calculator seen by Reuters. It is an experiment taking place across Silicon Valley, which often sets trends for other large employers. Facebook and Twitter also cut pay for remote workers who move to less expensive areas, while smaller companies including Reddit and Zillow have shifted to location-agnostic pay models, citing advantages when it comes to hiring, retention, and diversity. So we have companies like Facebook and Twitter who are cutting pay when people either choose to work from home or move to a cheaper city. And we have other companies like Reddit and Zillow who are saying, we don't care where you live. You know, if you want to live in Des Moines, Iowa, and your rent's only $600, we're still going to pay you $300,000 a year or whatever it might be. Alphabet Inc., Google, stands out in offering employees a pay calculator that allows them to see the effects of a move, but in practice, some remote employees, especially those who commute from long distances, could experience pay cuts without changing their address. Our compensation packages have always been determined by location, and we always pay at the top of the local market based on where an employee works from, a Google spokesperson said, adding that pay will differ from city to city and state to state. Here's kind of an interesting thing, right? Assuming you don't have to be in the office, let's say I work for Google and I work in San Francisco. Maybe in reality I wind up moving to, trying to think of a cheaper city. Maybe I wind up moving to Jacksonville, Florida, a cheap city, but maybe I have a relative who lives in Manhattan. And, you know, since I don't actually have to be in an office, maybe I just decide to tell Google, yeah, I'm living at Manhattan, here's my address, and give a relative's address. Not sure if that would work or not. One Google employee who asked not to be identified for fear of retaliation typically commutes to the Seattle office from a nearby county and would likely see their pay cut by 10% by working from home full-time, according to estimates by the company's work location tool launched in June. So apparently they have a tool or a calculator that you can see how much your pay is going to change depending on where you wind up moving to or working from. The employee was considering remote work but decided to keep going to the office despite the 2-hour commute. It's as high of a pay cut as I got for my most recent promotion. I didn't do all that hard work to get promoted, then to take a pay cut, they said. And here's kind of an interesting thing, right? Ultimately, happy employees are productive employees, and I can't imagine somebody commuting 2 hours to work is going to be a happy employee. So Google is not only paying them more, but they likely have a less happy employee who's going to stick around for a shorter period of time and who's not going to be as productive, but they're kind of doing this all in the name of, you know, we're going to cut your pay if you don't live in an expensive city. Jake Rosenfeld, a sociology professor at Washington University in St. Louis who researches pay determination, said Google's pay structure raises alarm about who will feel the impacts most acutely, including families. What's clear is that Google doesn't have to do this, Rosenfeld said. Google has paid these workers at 100% of their prior wage by definition, so it's not like they can't afford to pay their workers who choose to work remotely the same that they are used to receiving. Screenshots of Google's internal salary calculator seen by Reuters show that an employee living in Stamford, Connecticut, an hour from New York City by train, would be paid 15% less if she worked from home, while a colleague from the same office living in New York City would see no cut working from home. Screenshots showed 5% and 10% differences in Seattle, Boston, and San Francisco areas. Interviews with Google employees indicate pay cuts as high as 25% for remote work if they left the San Francisco office for almost as expensive. Let's see. Interviews with Google employees indicate pay cuts as high as 25% for remote work if they left San Francisco for an almost as expensive area of the state, such as Lake Tahoe. The calculator states it uses U.S. Census Bureau Metropolitan Statistical Areas, or CBSAs. Stamford, Connecticut, for example, is not New York City CBSA, even though many people who live there work in New York. A Google spokesperson said the company will not change an employee's salary based on them going from office work to being fully remote in a city where the office is located. Employees working in a New York City office will be paid as much as those working remotely from another New York location, for example, according to the spokesperson. Google did not specifically address the issue for commuters from areas such as Stamford, Connecticut. Let's see. Okay, so I guess that's the end of the article. I always like seeing if we have comments. We don't have any comments. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Like, I can see if you want to have people in the office, There definitely are some benefits to having people in the office. I think communication is better. I think the rapport between employees can be better. It can be better for company culture. So I can definitely see benefits to having somebody who works in the office, but it's kind of silly if you're going to have two remote people and you're going to pay them differently just based on the city that they're living in or working from. But would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this, as well as your guys' thoughts and experiences on remote work as a whole. So go ahead and drop your comments down below. If you guys enjoyed today's video, give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to the channel, click that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching, as always, and we'll catch you on the next video.